Hey, everybody, welcome into the Raw Knuckles podcast. We'd really appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, and share with a friend.
Who knows? Maybe he stays in the wing. Maybe he goes back to center. My hope is at some point, whether it's this year or next, that he goes back to the middle and becomes what we think he can become as a centerman. But listen, he's a great fit with those guys anyway. So one way or the other, it's a win.
When I stepped on the ice, I never backed down and I never stayed down.
And I was vicious and I was malicious, and I don't care.
He's a freaking madman. Look at him going to town. That'll be a suspension. That'll be a fine.
Yeah, welcome into the Raw Knuckles podcast. Just awesome that you took the time out of your schedule to join me. I appreciate it. So,
no problem.
But let's start. I want to start. Listen, I want to start back in the West Island, growing up here in Montreal and knowing what it was like. And I'm assuming you were a Habs fan growing up. What's that like growing up as a Habs fan out here in the West Island?
I mean, it's the Canadiens were always everywhere, right? And especially kind of in the formative years in the 70s when I was first kind of being introduced to hockey. I mean, they were winning Stanley Cups. It was like a birthright here to win cups. And so hockey was always everywhere. The Canadiens were always everywhere. And it goes a long way, I think, in terms of cementing that passion for not just for the Canadiens, but for the sport of hockey, because they were so successful and adored here in Montreal.
So you grew up there, you play Bantam, AA, play with the Royals, then the Lac St. Louis Lions. Now, as a young kid growing up on the West Island, you must have had aspirations like any Quebec hockey player. They want to play for the Habs. Was that your case?
Yeah, definitely. I think I said I was telling somebody once, it took me a little longer than everybody else to figure out that I wasn't going to play for the Habs or in the NHL. But sometimes ignorance is bliss if you're going through life thinking you're better than you are.
Yeah. Well, every kid has that dream. It's like me growing up in Boston wanting to be a Bruin and then having my dreams dashed by getting drafted by the Canadiens. But it turned out for the best, for sure. So, you went the college route, Middlebury College. I had a good friend, Jack Doyle, who went there. He played hockey there, Jackie. He majored in Russian, minored in finance, great language school, right? And then you go off to BC and you get your Juris Doctor degree from Boston College. Being a Huntington Hound, not too impressed.
Wow, I transferred over there. My boys were there. So.
Yeah. But so you're in college, you're getting your law degree. What are your aspirations there when you're getting out of school? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do with your life?
So I actually had decided I wanted to stay involved in hockey. I kind of, I remember maybe my mom was trying to wake me up to the fact that I wasn't going to play in the NHL when my college career was coming to an end. And she had said, you've always been so passionate about hockey and you've always been a really good student. Like how do you mix the two and use your brain to be involved in hockey? And I said, I'm going to go play in Europe. And I could see the look on her face wasn't necessarily approving of it. But in any event, I spent that year thinking about, like, how do I do this? How do I stay involved in hockey? Do I coach? Do I do this? And ultimately, my brother at the time was a early pick of the Nordiques, and I had a lot of friends, the guys that I played in Lac St. Louis, like Enrico Ciccone and Eric Charon and Dominic Roussel. There were a lot of guys around, Marty Lapointe back in the time, the guys that were playing in the NHL. So I started asking them, like, what does your agent do? And, trying to understand that profession a little bit better. And then ultimately decided, like, in order to do it well, I should go to law school. So when I went to law school, I was, kind of committed to going down the path of being a hockey agent as opposed to practicing law. And for 2 years, my last 2 years at BC, I actually worked for a guy named Jay Fee, who used to represent Cam Neal and some of the other guys. So I had my foot in it for a couple of years before I graduated.
So your apprenticeship with him, and now you graduate and you get out on your own. Did you stay with Jay, or you went on your own?
No, I went on my own. Jay was with a law firm at the time, and then he was, the Bobby Orr and Larry Moulter and those guys were buying Bob Wolf and Associates, and that was kind of a project in the works. And I felt like, geez, I got to get working here.
Yeah.
So I got an opportunity through BC had a sports law professor at the time that was the president of the American Sports Lawyers Association by the name of Bob Barry.
Yeah.
And Bob consulted with a group out of Florida called Impact Sports. And actually one of them was a former, ironically, these guys actually worked at Bob Wolf and Associates at one point, went off on their own. And Mitch Frankel was a former BC law guy, and Professor Barry connected us, and the rest is history. I went and that's how I started.
So you start with them, but to get that, did they hand you the first clients, or did you have to rink rat it and really go out and pound the pavement and get your own guys?
Oh, I rink ratted it. The first kind of significant client ended up being interestingly enough, a Montreal Canadiens draft pick, a second-round pick by the name of Gregor Baumgartner, and a fellow Boston guy, Timmy Burke, who had recruited me to go to Princeton back in the day. I ran into him in the rinks, and he's like, "What about the 16-year-old playing at Clarkson? Get on him!" So, that was the first client. But yeah, there was a lot of. It was funny, Chris, because when I was in law school, I studied everything and anything that had anything to do with sport, the business of sport and the law of sport. So antitrust and labor law and contracts and contracts drafting, entertainment, sports, tax, estate planning, everything. And I go to my first recruiting meeting ever out in, it was actually in Quebec in St. Eustache. And it was a family of a young goalie. And back then, Gilles Lupien had all the goalies in Quebec.
Yeah.
So we go in and try to pitch him, and had a great 2-hour meeting. All we did was talk about hockey for 2 hours. We get back in the car, and the guy that was doing some scouting for me, he goes, "That was great." I said, "Great. We didn't even talk business. All we did was talk about hockey for 2 hours. We'll never get him." Yeah. And he started laughing. He's like, "Well, I think they think you're bilingual and you got a law degree, and they wanted to make sure they could connect with you as a person." I went home, said to my wife, "I just got my first lesson in sales, I think."
Yeah. So that's funny. Berkey was my roommate my first year pro. And
was he really?
And I'm telling you, he helped me like you would not believe, because I was so ignorant of the pro game and all that went into it. And we had a coach named Bert Templeton down in Halifax my first season, and I got sent there. And Bert didn't like college kids. So Berkey told me, he said, "Listen, get in the back of the line. Don't be the first in the drill. Watch and then do it, because this guy does not like college kids." So who's first in line and screws up the drill? Richie Costello. He went to Merrimack.
Oh, nice.
He went to Merrimack, right? And Richie goes and does a drill, and he screws it up. And Bert Templeton blows the whistle. He goes, Costello, what the fuck are you doing, you dumb fuck? You're a college kid. You're supposed to be smart. Get in the end of the fucking line." He was gone the next day, Richie Costello. He was just finished. Yeah, he was out of there the next day. And Berkey, look, I mean, okay, I get it now. But Timmy Burke, we're such good friends. And over the years, it's funny, come here a few times and stay with me. And Jamie, my girlfriend, says, I've never heard, he'll come here and stay, overnight. We'll have dinner. He said, "I never heard two people talk so much. We never stop." And Timmy just, he reminds me of old Prof. Caron with the Canadiens. I think that's where he got it, honestly. But so the agent business, you get going, you build it up. Your first real big client is Vincent, I take it, Vincent Lecavalier.
Yep.
And then you get going, and you're going good in that business. You're living down in the Boston area. a lot of people go to college there. They end up loving it and staying there. Is that what happened with you? Yeah. Any thought of coming back home or none of that?
You know, at the time, I thought Boston was a really good place to be from an agent perspective, because at the time, as you know, the American Hockey League was all over Massachusetts, right? And it was easy. Sherbrooke was, as it is now, in the Quebec League. I could drive to Sherbrooke from where I was in 3.5 hours. So I could, and they ultimately went to Lewiston for a period of time, right? Which put a team even closer. So I felt like I'd always get back to Quebec business wise. But then it was just easier to fly everywhere out of Boston too. And you know, it had become like a second home to me. So I stayed, but I was up, and I remember, and I actually talked to Ray. I ended up representing Ray's sons, Chris and Ryan. Yeah. I remember golfing with Ray and saying this to him at one point. I used to always, you know, I spent a lot of time in Montreal, even though I was living in Boston. My wife's from Montreal originally, and I would say to her, I'm going home. I'm going to go home for a few weeks and recruit. And at one point, now we got 3 kids and we're living in Boston, and she starts laughing. She goes, by the way, Boston, this is home now. Like, you're going to Montreal.
Yeah. So is it Westwood? Did you live?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good friend of mine lives there, Mike Daly, good buddy. But so the agent business, before we get into the real deal, what you're doing now, what's the toughest part of that business for the agent, I guess? You know, we often hear agents and they're talking about their players. You know, they're always trying to talk a positive manner and promote those guys. What's the toughest part for you?
You know what? I think probably trying to be as honest and candid with them when they need it and they don't necessarily want to hear it, whether that be about, you know, the kind of the prospects moving forward with their career, or you kind of often end up being like a father figure to these guys, right? Because you're getting in at like 15 years of age, 16, sometimes 14, and depending on the player, you're talking to them a lot, so you build up this relationship. But I always felt like you want to become, you know, like Vinny and I became friends over a period of time, but I was also always able to be very direct and honest with them, whether it be on ice or off ice stuff. And that always became a challenge, like to be able to find, not everybody responds as well to criticism. Like, and I remember this, like it was yesterday. He was struggling. He was fighting with torts, and you know, you're trying to get in. You want your client to believe that you got his back, but you also want to kind of say, hey, like, you got to own part of this too. And he also had to be better, putting everything else aside. So I remember he called me. I was trying to help him. I've described myself as a hockey nerd a few times here, but so I would watch his game and be like, listen, you're playing New Jersey. Like, they put the Chinese wall up from goalie to goalie. Like, if you want to touch pucks, you can't. He used to, like, puck would break out on the left side and he'd swing to the right. Yeah. He had this, he was trying to create space all the time away from the puck. And I said, you do that, you're never going to see a puck. So he calls after a game. He was really struggling. So it was kind of an every night post-game conversation during that period. I think it was, for him, it was the first time facing adversity. I mean, it's kind of interesting for athletes, right? Because so much of, and I heard Carey say, there's so much of their identity is tied up in who they are as hockey players. So when you're struggling as a hockey player, it's like your whole life is struggling. Yeah. And so he called and I'm like, what were you doing? He's like, what? I said, what did I tell you that it was going to happen in New Jersey? You didn't touch a puck. You were on the wrong side of the wall the whole night. And then he has a really good self-deprecating sense of humor. So he goes, did I do anything right? Right? And I have him on speakerphone. My wife's listening. I'm like, did you call me to put my pom-poms on and be a cheerleader? You want to become a better hockey player? And so we hang up. My wife looks at me. She goes, God, I just wish you were a little smarter than that. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, he did call for a cheerleader. He didn't want to talk about hockey. He's struggling. He just needs help. He needs you to be a distraction, not to tell him how he screwed up. So apparently I didn't know much about sales or sports psychology at the time.
But so doing that, and that's, again, you can see, certainly you having a background in hockey and having played the game, that's one thing. How about some agents that, they've never played the game. Do you think that can be somewhat of a hindrance?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you perceive your role to be. I think some people think it's just to negotiate contracts, and I never really saw it like that, because especially in the era that, like, the last 15 years, like, a lot of guys, you negotiate 3 contracts in their career, right? If I look back to Vinny, a 3-year entry level, then a 4-year deal, then a 4-year deal, then an 11-year deal, and then he got bought out, so another one. So that would be a lot of contracts to negotiate on behalf of a player. So I always felt that the job was to, if you didn't know hockey, I don't even think you could do a great job on the contract, because you had to really forecast who your player is, what's he doing, what situations is he playing in, is he better than he shows, is he like, if we strike now, is it prime time to strike? Like, we're going to sell him at the highest point, and he's probably not going to live up to the contract in terms of his play. Like, so I always felt like you can't sell cars. We don't know anything about cars. And it's hard to be in the real estate game if you don't know real estate. I think it's hard to be in the business of hockey, even as an agent, without knowing hockey.
So, Vincent, there was a time his contract was up, and there was talk here in Montreal, I don't know if it's true, but that, the Canadiens wanted him. They wanted him to come here, and I'm sure he heard of it. Are you the bastard who talked him out of it?
Well, I wouldn't say I was the bastard that talked him out of it. It was kind of I was the bastard that structured his deal with Tampa in a way that it would have cost him money. It was because we had back then, everybody who did deals, they tried to front load signing bonus, and I always felt like signing bonus had 3 purposes to it. One was buyout protection, and you were more likely to get bought out the back of your deal than the front. So when you're signing a deal that's going to take you to 41 years of age, you want your signing bonus on the back. I also felt it was a little bit of insurance protection, right? Because a lot of athletes spend a lot of money on disability insurance, but every year that you made however many millions of dollars, you knew that you were still guaranteed all this money on the back end. I felt like you'd save a few $100,000 on insurance, disability. And ultimately, the biggest issue was tax planning, right? Because we structured his language in a way that it was true signing bonus. Like, they basically, his right to that signing bonus vested when we signed the deal. He could have retired and left, and they would have had to pay him. And we didn't do it for that purpose. We did it to, when a team, like, Florida's got no state income tax, but those players still get taxed when you go on the road. You go to California and they're getting whacked for duty days, right? So every day it's 187th or whatever of your salaries deemed to have been earned. So I had been on with the California Franchise Tax Board, along with the accountant that we worked with, trying to understand at what point would you truly treat something as signing bonus and not tax it when the athlete came. No. And so that was the structure of Vinny's deal. When he got bought out, he still had whatever it was, like, I want to say 14 million or so of signing bonus that was due. And if he went to Montreal, then he would have had not just the salary he was earning here, like, he was earning $2 million a year from Tampa, plus all the buyout money. He would have had to pay taxes on all of that as well. So it put a layer of complication into it. Yeah,
I guess so. And so that, again, a lot of guys didn't come here. I mean, I know over the years, there was talk about players coming and the tax ramifications, the language issue. Especially American guys. Oh, my kid got to go to school in French, which is a good thing, by the way. Mm-hmm. I think it scares some people off, though, when they don't really take the time to look into it and see how beneficial it could be for their children going to school here. But that being said, so you build up the great business, and you got a lot of players, and life is good. Kids are growing up, going off to college. Did you have any aspirations of getting out of that business and doing something else? and I'm not necessarily talking about being a GM, but all right, I've done this long enough. All right, I'm going to do this the rest of my. Do you ever get bored of it?
I don't think I got bored of it.
Or maybe just want to do something else with.
Well, you know what's funny, because I coached a lot. I coached my son's teams and my daughter, and then when they were off doing other things, I continued to coach, and like coached. It was an 05 group for 4 years in Boston. I love being involved. I just love going to the rink and working with the kids and being around it and the fun of being part of a team, but also, the competitiveness of it all.
Yeah.
So in the back of my head, I kind of wondered if at some point I slowed down on the agency side a little and maybe coached a prep school or something.
Yeah. So you get that business going, and you were approached before by Jeff Gorton when he was with the Rangers. He kind of reached out to you about maybe working with them, and you didn't. And then all of a sudden, Jeff Gorton becomes executive vice president of Montreal Canadiens, and not too long after, he reaches out to you. Now, I'm here, and I'm thinking, all right, I had heard you as an agent. I didn't know the whole backstory, but I'm their agent and general manager. Yeah, that could work, I guess. But all these other names were coming up there. They're pushing Patrick, they're pushing this one and that one, and your name had come up, and then it kind of went away for a little bit. Did it ever go away in your mind when it first was brought to you? When Jeff came to you, what was the conversation you had with yourself, and what was your heart telling you at the same time? You got the intellectual piece and then that passion piece. What happened there when Jeff contacted you the first time?
The first time I said no, and I said no maybe without thinking enough about it. I guess I always, dating back to when Jeff had first approached me with New York, which is actually a funny story because I said no right away. And he said, he goes, you know what? You're so arrogant. You didn't even ask how much. We're the New York Rangers, we're not the Florida Panthers. And I started laughing and I said, I'm so arrogant that I can't handle you being my boss unless I'm wearing a suit standing behind the bench. Oh. And he started laughing. He goes, we just let go Tortorella. We're not hiring Tortorella Jr. Yeah. So, but I think the reasoning for me, Chris, was just more family related, right? Like I felt like early on, if I took a job like that, I would ultimately, job security is not great. We really liked Boston. We liked where we were living, and we were going to uproot the kids and my wife and go somewhere, and then probably be looking for a new job. So, I probably didn't consider it because more for family reasons than anything else. And then when he called about Montreal, I was like, my kids they're all in school in Boston. My daughter's at BU, the boys are at Northeastern, and it's coming to an end. So I was like, a couple more years. And when Jeff called back again, he's like, timing's never going to be perfect. You're waiting for the perfect timing, but it may never happen. And it's Montreal. It's where you're from. It's the Montreal Canadiens. And there were a few people, like I mentioned that Billy Guerin, when he heard about it, called and said, are you going to do this? And he was very positive and pushed me to do it. The other guy was David Morehouse, who had been the president of the Penguins for a long time. And he kept calling me and saying, you got to do this. Like this, you'd be really good at it. And you can't sit around waiting all the time. You may never get another call.
So that pushed you over the hump.
Yeah. You know what he said to me? He goes, you and I talk all the time. And he said, no offense, the only thing we ever talk about is hockey. He goes, that's all you talk about. Yeah. He's like, it's your passion. Just make that next step. So then I started thinking about it and talking to my wife about it. And when Jeff called back and said, so what do you think? I had said to him initially, go ahead and interview who you have to interview, and I'll think about it, but I doubt I would do it. And then when he called back, I was like, I think I'm ready to throw my name in the ring here and at least go through the process of interviewing.
So you went through that process, and you sit down with I guess there was a group of people there, ownership, and Jeff, and I believe Bob Gainey, my former left winger there.
Yep.
Some guys were involved. The French piece, that had to be talked about, right? Because again, here, Jeff was hired, and everybody's talking about, well, we got to have a French GM, we got to have a French coach. I get it. I get it sometimes, and then sometimes I don't. But it was almost like it wasn't good enough, because here's a West Island. I've been living in Boston. You're not your typical good Chenu, but you're bilingual. Mm-hmm. What did you think of that when you started hearing some of that stuff?
That doesn't bother me. I'm not an overly political guy. I mean, I get the both sides of it, I guess. Ultimately, I'm not the subject. I'm the object of that story.
Yeah.
Right. So whether it's me or somebody else, that is a political topic that doesn't really that didn't bother me or deter me. Like some people be like, I can't believe Francois Legault hasn't reached out to congratulate. Like, I personally, I don't care. I don't need to be congratulated. And
well, it's funny, and I'll just tell my own experience with it. And you grew up here. I didn't. And coming from Boston, I grew up in a very turbulent time, racially intolerant time, between black people and white people in Boston, and busing, all that stuff. So I grew up in that environment. And when I came here, this is how young and naive I was. And there was the first referendum right around 79 and 80. Yep. And I'm like, how come all these white people can't get along? I didn't get the whole, honestly, that's how naive I was when I got here. And then I started to understand it more. And certainly I'm not totally bilingual, but I can speak enough and understand enough to get by. But geez, I get where they're coming from, but I've looked over the years too here, and it always seemed like they hamstrung themselves because, they couldn't take the best person. And anyway, enough. That's done. You're here now. And when you took this job coming in, what you have some butterflies coming up here that first time? And am I going to be accepted? Are they going to, you must have been a little nervous, no?
You know what? It's funny. I have a bridge phobia. Yeah. I struggle to drive over bridges. Okay. I was probably more nervous about how I was going to get over the Champlain Bridge every day than anything else. In fact, funny story, because I left before Highway 30 was built and whatever, and obviously, there was a lot of talk about a different way to get out to like the Hudson, St. Lazare, and those parts west. So I called my wife's friend and I said, I'm going to go see my parents. Can I get to the West Island without going over the Champlain and everything else? And I said, what if I just took Highway 30? So I drive way out of the way. I'm going through Valleyfield and all, and I look up in the dark and I see these lights going up in the air. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I got to go over a bridge anyways. I just want an hour out of my way. So I get home. My dad looks at me and goes, did you really think you were getting onto an island without going over a bridge? No, I wasn't. I wasn't overly nervous, but I was a little bit nervous about the language, just being able to answer questions in French and not stumble the first couple of times. They were coming in with my prepared remarks at the beginning, and we kept. I was like, I can't pronounce that word. Let's find a different word for it. I don't roll my R's very well, so that part of it was more nerve-wracking than the kind of the task at hand. Yeah, I guess. I think. I kind of knew what we were going to do. And there's, let's face it, there's a little bit of reassurance when you come to a job like this and there's somebody like Jeff Gorton that's already here, who's already done it, and who I know very well and have known for a number of years, and we've talked a lot about hockey, and I knew we shared a lot of similar thoughts, but it's just, you know, I felt like you were there was always going to be a parachute there.
And God, working next to a guy like him, certainly, that's a big boost in your corner for sure. That with his track record, there's no question about it. So you come in here, the team went to the Stanley Cup final. We know what happened. Jeff came in, let go of Bergie. You come in, and then there was kind of a vote of confidence for the coach, and Dominic Ducharme. It was initially announced that he'd be retained for the remainder of the season, and then all of a sudden, losing 7 straight games, beginning of 2022, things weren't looking good at all. Coming in, so listen, you want to bring your own people. I get that. At some point, you're going to give this guy a chance, but that's really tough to watch. The team you're taking over to manage now, and they're in such disarray. You got the salary cap to deal with. You got to do this whole thing over, and it's actually kind of good being able to start with a clean slate and then just build what you want to build here. And how difficult was that, the first thing, having to fire Dominic Ducharme?
Yeah, that was, I mean, I was probably, Jeff was the one that had come out and said before I got here that Dom would be there for the rest of the year. And then when I got here, we started talking. I mean, I don't think we foresaw, or Jeff foresaw, like the depths of which the team would fall. I mean, it's one thing to be losing games. And when I first got here, even, like, I remember we went to, we had just won in Dallas, and we joined a team in Vegas and play a pretty good team in Vegas. And we lost, but it was close. We went to Colorado and we lost, but it was close. And then Minnesota, we got walloped. Like, it was worse than the score. And I think it was 8-2. And then it just started to snowball. And I was more worried about just the locker room. It just felt like, after games, it was morbid. It was like, I didn't even want to go down. Yeah. It was depressing. So, that's where I started thinking, like, hey, talking to him, saying, I know we're thinking this and we can reevaluate at the end of the year, but how much damage are we doing? Like, we need to do some things to make some changes and to let the players know we're not just sitting on our hands here, that, we're working on their behalf.
So, yeah, and certainly when looking from the outside, you can see it. I mean, you've seen it before as an agent. You can see it when the players, they're not responding, and they weren't. So you make that move, and you go to a guy you happen to know pretty well, in Martin St. Louis, and, you look at it now, it's a brilliant move. You looked at it then, I think a lot of people scratch their head and say, oh, he's coaching kids. But, I mean, when you look at the kids he's coaching now, there's a lot of kids he's coaching. And talking to some of them guys, they talked about the first time he came in the room and spoke. What went in your decision to bring Marty in? And again, we know he's a character guy, but could he come in and do that job? What gave you that confidence that he could do that?
Well, I always felt that, one, I knew Marty well. I knew him well as a person, but also as a hockey guy. I mean, heck, I used to, I've known him since he was a teenager. I used to come back, ironically, when I was in Middlebury, my brother and I would come home in the summer times, and we would coach a travel team. And I coached, among others from around here, like hockey guys like PJ Stock, but JF Wool, who's our coach in the American Hockey League. And we would play against Marty all the time. And that's when I first started to, like, wow, this guy's good. And anyways, our paths crossed a lot. He ended up at UVM, then Tampa, and I was in Tampa a lot. And then post-playing days, we were coaching against each other all the time. But we spent a lot of time talking about hockey. I always knew he had a special hockey mind, and I would talk to Vinny about it. And when we started thinking that we might need a change, and I said, am I crazy? And Vinny's point was that maybe somebody's better today to coach one game but nobody has the potential to be as good as Marty. He's like, he's got one of the best hockey minds. I'm like, okay, great. So, we see the same way. And then when Jeff and I started talking, I said, listen, we need change here. I think Marty would be really good. I don't think we could ever hire Marty if we wait to the end of the year. And he's got to go up against everybody. We have the perfect opportunity to figure out if he's good. Let's hire him on an interim basis. And he comes in. If he's good, great. And if he's not, then, if we're wrong about this, then at the end of the year, we'll go through a more thorough search for a coach. And that's really how that came to be. Jess said, I want to talk to Marty one more time. And he went and met with him. And then we had to convince Marty to bet on himself and come.
Yeah. How was that? Was he a little reluctant? Was he like, I'm coaching my kids. I don't want to do this now. Did you have to twist his arm a little bit?
I felt like Marty was going to coach no matter what. He just had too much. It's in his blood, right? The sport. So the bigger issue for him was really taking it on an interim basis for fear that the players wouldn't take him seriously because he was just an interim tag. And I read all kinds of things we hired him to just be our eyes in the dressing room and tell us everything, and none of which was true. So he's like, I'm not afraid to bet on myself. I just don't want to be set up to fail because I don't get the credibility of the players. And I remember the conversation just saying, see, at some point you have to be able to trust and that I'll make sure that doesn't happen.
And that's awesome, getting that kind of support. And when I've talked to, I've talked to Nick Suzuki, I've talked to Weidman, I've talked to a few of them, Caulfield, they, and they didn't go into detail, but I said, I heard about the coach coming in that first speech he gave to the team. And Weidman told me, he said, I have never heard anything like that before come out of a coach's mouth. So he obviously, and the three of them were, they're adamant about that, how refreshing it was to hear that. Because we look at old school coaches, the league is changing. I get it. Kids are a little different today with the way they're brought up and how that impacts their lives moving forward. But, you're looking at, the old school coaches. I love Lemire. I was a Lemire disciple, right? I love Jacques Lemire. He had the trap, he used it well. He implemented that. He won championships with it. And some around the league copied it. And certainly it was kind of, they got a lot of blame for dumbing the game down and making it too slow. And, what did you think of that whole era with the trap? And now you're coming in and it's more wide open, more creative game than it was, I think, back then. But then the flip side of that is I heard Bobby Orr say he'd like to see the red line back in. So teams coming up the ice together would have to pass their way out of trouble and through the neutral zone. And there's a lot there to unpack, I guess. I don't know if I'm clear in my question.
No, I hear what you're saying. I like offense. I think that's we're still in the entertainment business, and I think clearly the league thinks that they look at all kinds of different ways to increase goal scoring. I don't think about it so much as goal scoring. I think about it in terms of the offense. It's just, how many opportunities are generated, whether they go in or not. I think the excitement is in watching the game. And it's a beautiful, again, I grew up in the 70s with the Flying Frenchman, and the hockey was so fun to watch. I think if you took the red line away, teams are so good, structurally, defensively, that they would eat the ice up on us. I really feel like forcing a team to defend the greatest surface possible allows for more offense.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that I have, over the years of coaching, thought through and said, we all grew up, Chris, right? Head man the puck.
Yeah.
Head man the puck. And without a red line, even if there were, I don't believe in that so much anymore. I think that players are, I call them false fronts, call them whatever you want, stretch guys, but a lot of times they're not intended to get the puck. They're pushing people back
off
to create space underneath so that we can come up with speed and support around them. So I actually think you can do that and pass your way through the neutral zone, and that's what we're trying to do, and build a team that can do that and play that style. It doesn't mean that you're not going to put pucks into areas at times too, but I worry that without a red line, they could shrink the ice too much.
Yeah, for sure. And I hear that for sure. Looking at your first draft now, you come take over this team. That first draft, everybody is thinking that the Canadiens are going to pick Shane Wright. And I remember speaking to Jeff Foreman out, and he didn't tell me anything. He just said one thing. He told me, he said, this team has to get bigger. So I'm like, oh, okay. Now, what went into that decision? And is it you and Jeff sitting there really hashing this out, the scouting staff? Did some guys go against it? Some guys want it. Some guys wanted Wright. Some guys didn't think Slafkovsky would be the guy. What went into that decision? Because it surprised a whole lot of people.
Well, we really even before the season, I mean, like Jeff and I drove to Kingston a couple of times to watch Shane play. Nick Bobroff came with us once, only because Nick joined later in the season. Right, he must have joined us at some point in February. So our guys had already been in, but the new sets of eyes being Jeff and Nick. I had seen Shane. My son played against him and a lot growing up, or in different events, and then I had been at events just from a work perspective, like the Canada Games or the U17 World. So I had seen him a number of times. I think ultimately I knew Cooley because he played with he played up a lot. Yeah. He was the 4 team and my guy was on the 03s, but he was up a lot. It was the COVID year. There were injuries and sickness. So we wanted to do our homework. We wanted to get it right. Like, you don't get the number 1 overall pick every year. And we wanted to get it as right as we could, right? Because, who knows who ends up being the best hockey player when their careers are over. It may be somebody that went in the 3rd round, for all we know. But we watched a lot. We watched a ton on video. Vinny was very involved as well, mostly from a video standpoint. But nowadays, like the value of video in some of these software programs is like you can really look at a guy. You can look at his own entries. You can look at defensive play. You can just watch his shifts. You don't have to watch a 60-minute game. So in an hour, you might be able to see 3 games worth of hockey. So we did a ton. And then when we started to sense, like Jeff and I went to the U18s in Germany along with the scouts, and then we went back to Finland for the Worlds, got to see Slafkovsky play. And as we sensed that we were going towards, like, it just seemed like the momentum was moving a little bit towards Uri, we actually went the other way, right? And started challenging them, saying like, okay, maybe Shane didn't have the best year, but he's been, he's done it all the way through. Let's find games this season and prior seasons where he was playing, and let's evaluate it. And are we still going with Slafkovsky? So I saw him play a game against Mississauga. I want to say it was in March. He played really well, and I texted everybody saying, "Can you guys watch this game?" And so it was a pretty. Listen, we weren't in the playoffs, obviously. That's why we were picking number 1. So we had the luxury of time to really drill down and try to make sure that we dotted the I's and crossed the T's in terms of due diligence. And we did. And then there's character components to it. And they were all great guys.
Yeah.
Shane seemed like a really nice guy. Logan Cooley seemed like a great guy too. For me, I feel the one thing I just say
they're all good character guys. What separates them? And because again, I'm not going to say you don't draft by need, but this team needed to get bigger. They needed talent, obviously. But what separates them when you're that close? Say you got 4 guys there, and you're like, okay, just say Cooley, Wright, and Slafkovsky. Like, they all got character. They're all. What separates them? and you say
Well,
that's what I'm gonna do.
I think they're different players, right?
Yeah.
Shane's going to play Shane's game, and Logan Cooley's going to play his game, and Uri's going to play his game. I guess ultimately we were betting on Uri, his game being most translatable, in our opinion. Okay, and we're splitting hairs here.
Yeah.
They were all hockey players, but like the character piece to me is a factor. You're coming to Montreal, you're going to deal with tons of pressure, and you have to think about. I loved it when he came in the day of the thing. I said, "What do you love about hockey?" And he said, "I love being on the ice in the last 5 minutes of a game when we're up 4-3, and I love being on the ice when we're down 4-3." And that just resonated with me because so many people, I feel like in today's game, like they're worried about how many goals, how many assists, and worried about it. And when you get to the business side of it, it becomes even more natural to be more focused on yourself because you score more, you do this more, you make more money. But at the end of the day, for us to win, we need guys that are committed to winning first and foremost, above everything else, that are going to put some of their individual needs and wishes aside to be able to put the team first.
Yeah.
And I just felt like it just resonated. This guy is like a hockey player. He wants to play hockey.
Yeah. And you can see it. Listen, when I heard him, he said at 16 years old, he lived on his own in Finland. I couldn't believe that. He had his own apartment, right? 14
was on his own. He went to Austria first. Yeah, it's crazy.
Like, who does that? Like, you never see that. Families letting their kid go, and he lived in his own apartment, cooked for himself. I mean, that's impressive. It says a lot. And making those moves. And all right, so you picked your edge. You know what I want to ask? Did any part of you want to draft your son this year? He was drafted in the second round, right? Northeastern. Did any part of you ever consider drafting your son? Because, I mean, come on. Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, we talked about it. When I say we, both internally as an organization, but also kind of at home with my wife, and I just, ultimately, more than anything else, people say, "Oh, it's going to be hard. There's that much extra pressure." I wasn't. Pressure's pressure. Like, you're a professional athlete, you have tons of pressure to perform. I was more worried about, like, could you be normal in the locker room, or are all the guys going to be worried that they can't really hang with you? Like, the great part about hockey and the camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. Do you get deprived of that because they're worried that you're going back and telling your dad, "This guy's out till 4:00 in the morning, or he's this, or he's not good." I didn't want that for him. And then I figured the other component was, one day I'm going to lose my job, and he's still going to be here. Just seemed weird, like if that ever happened. So I wanted to ultimately kind of put him in a situation where, if he's lucky enough to be a pro hockey player and make it, that he can live that experience and not have like an asterisk and things that could be taken away from the experience.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. And because I looked when I first started here, Boom Boom was the coach, and Danny was the first round pick the year I was the same year I was drafted, 78. And man, that was difficult. He had a son there, and he was playing him, and he wasn't playing him, and it caused some issues. And I think it really hurt the Boomer. Because there were times he was taking heat for playing his son and then having to sit him out. It was a difficult situation. So yeah, I was just curious of that. So you guys certainly have, I think, exceeded expectations in the early go here. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, and I don't want to say, "Oh, way to go, you won the cup already," because you haven't. But geez, I look at this team. They're exciting as hell to watch. They certainly some nights they've struggled to score goals, but it just seems like with all these young guys in the lineup, man, to see these guys 3-4 years, this group grow together as a core, man, and to add to that, I just, as you move on, and I look at the health of the minor league team and the number of players you have. This team has not, and I'm not kicking Berge, I'm not, but the team sucked in the American League for the last, I don't know how many, since Berge was here. It seemed like he never stockpiled those picks. And then, he made some great trades. There's no question, but you could never go pluck somebody from down below and bring them up and have an impact somewhat. And it seems in the early go here, it seems like there's a lot of good young prospects here. And we always hear about that. Like, oh, that's how you're going to rebuild a team. You got to draft well. But boy, it seems like you guys really come out of the gate flying as far as that goes.
Well, I mean, in fairness to them, some of the young players, like, I'd love to take credit for them, but we didn't bring Gooley here. And
No.
when I say we, I mean Jeff and I were part of that draft process.
Yep.
A lot of the scouts that are on our staff were part of that scouting staff that drafted him. Obviously, Trevor was the head guy. So I think there was a nucleus of good young players that were about to come. And I think that the benefit that we had is you come in, maybe Montreal as a city, the fan base was a little bit more ready than it's ever been before to potentially take a step backwards in order to take a step forward.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of chatter that we're going too fast and we need to get the number one pick or we need Connor Bedard.
No, thank you. Not that I wouldn't accept that, but I've heard it before. Teams want to dog it all year to get the first. That's a bad mentality. It's not a winning mentality down the road. It sends a bad message, right?
It's funny. Jeff said hockey gods last year when we were doing, he's like, I feel like if you were intentionally tanking, the hockey gods would make sure you didn't have the first pick and good karma. We ended up getting it this year or last season. But I think as a bigger piece to me, when you're coming into this year, is like we have these young players, their development is critical. And I think probably the biggest shift that we've tried to bring here is the focus on developing hockey players. And that's not limited to young hockey players. Like, we're working with Josh Anderson on parts of his game, or you hear Marty talk about, Galley modifying his game. He talked about it a little bit last night. So I'm a big believer. Like when I'm watching games, if I see things player wise, like I'm texting Adam Nicholas or whatever and saying, hey, so-and-so, we gotta try to work with him on this. And so, you got to coach a team, but I also think you got to coach players, and Marty does that. And we've given him enough support around, both with the coaching group are all really good teachers, right? Like Trevor, Burr, Roby, they're all really good. And then we've got the staff around them, and we'd like to continue to. You got Mary-Philippe Poulet, and you got Adam, and you got Scott Pellerin, and all these guys that are on the ice. And then we've got our development guys that are like Rammer and Frankie that are out, and Nick Carrier that are talking to the guys every day with the prospects. So I guess we're really focused on saying, hey, we're going to draft these players. We're going to bring them into the organization. We can't assume they're finished products, and every player can continue to get better.
Okay. So
that's what we're talking
in that. Do you believe that with that coaching staff, and say there were guys that aren't playing as often as others, or even guys in the minors, do you think that as well as the younger guys, some of the older guys, can they make those small incremental changes in their game in practice and over the course of time, especially, let's say, with older guys? How's that work?
Well, I absolutely think you can. I always thought that Brad Marchand was, being in Boston, I saw a lot of the Bruins, and I've watched his career heck, I watched his career from Val-d'Or to Moncton to Providence to Boston. I feel like he's in his 30s. He's still adding elements to his game. And it's not like happenstance. Like you'll see him do this, like some kind of a play. And sometimes it just happens reactionary.
Yeah.
And you never see it again. What I've always noticed with Brad is whatever like if he added an element to his game, he'd do it again the next game and he'd do it the next game. So he's been one of the best at getting better, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And he continues to do that late into his career. Brad probably has help, but he also probably has a keen desire and a unique capability of picking something and adding it to a game that's highly, reactionary. But yeah, like we've looked at Andy and said, okay, Andy's pretty good off the rush. But with his size and physique, we think he could be better at extending plays, right? Protecting pucks and doing those types of things.
Cycle.
Yeah. And what I think, again, when you coach young players all the time, you learn it because habits develop. Like Andy's really fast.
Yeah.
So even though he's really big, my guess is Andy escaped with his feet a lot when he was young.
Yeah.
And when you have that escapability, you just escape all the time and you don't learn that aspect of the game the same way. But then you get to the National Hockey League, and other than Connor McDavid or a couple others, aren't that many that escape.
Yeah.
So so we'll work with Andy on that thing. We may look at somebody like Joel Armia and say, we're noticing tendencies in his game. If we could change this and that, we could make him that much more effective. Like he's a really talented hockey player.
Yeah, he is. I always thought that's a guy that you can win with and will be standing at the end when you win a Stanley Cup. You need players like that. Yeah. But it can be frustrating too. And I'll just say from watching him, he got all the talent in the world. I seen him kill penalties one night. I'm like, this reminds me of Bobby Orr back in the day. He could hang on to the puck. People couldn't get it from him. And then, it's that consistency that we try and get out of players, right? Night in and night out. I had Lemire tell me, he came to me, and it's tough to be honest, get a player to be honest with themselves, right? And Lemire came to me one night. He said, hey, how do you think you played tonight? And I said, I'm not bad. I've had a better game, but not bad. He said, are you kidding me? Come on, be honest with yourself. I said, what? He said, you stunk tonight. I was like wounded, right? I'm like, but he said, Chris, listen, here's what I'm going to do. A game like tonight, we got 80 games. I'll let you have one of those every 10 games. So that's 8 a year. He said, this gives you something to shoot for. You can't let it slip. You have one bad game, you can't let it slip. You got to bounce back right the next. He was so good with me. Like, it's things I never thought of, right? And he really, he made it, I'll let you have one of them, but you can't let that go into a pattern. And sometimes you see that with players, and they have a tough time getting out of it. But anyway, I want to, you said, okay, you know what I want to ask is about Kirby Dach, the questions about Kirby Dach. Why hasn't he done this? Why hasn't he done that? He had some injuries. But I think it's a brilliant move by the coach to take him now. I don't know if it was the 3 years, all years, the scouting staff, but taking him and moving from center ice and put him to the wing to take some heat off that kid. Right. Mm-hmm. And not take some of that responsibility away and put him there. And the kid seems to me like he's flourishing.
1,000%. I think that decision was like Jeff and Marty and I basically we feel like we're back in college, right? Like, my wife comes and she goes back to Boston to see the kids, but she's the most present, and Jeff's son is finishing up high school before they move here, and Marty's got a younger boy, so we're like, too often, what are you doing tonight? Let's grab dinner. Yeah. And we probably overanalyze and discuss everything, but I think the decision was twofold. It was like he might be the best player to play with those two. And then the other component of it was maybe it takes, like you said, a little bit of the pressure off him. And when you're the third overall pick and there's this expectation that you're going to score and you're going to do all these things, well, I think everybody would, playing with Nick and Cole, you're going to have more opportunity to produce. I don't think we necessarily envisioned it would be at the level that Kirby's been scoring at. Knock on wood, hopefully he continues at that type of pace. But I think once, for a young hockey player, once you've done it, once you've shown the world you can do it, it might be easier to move him back to the middle and say, okay, we got to work on these things and get his focus committed to the areas that he needs to improve on to be the best center iceman that he can be, because you've accomplished, right?
Yeah.
You've scored at that kind of a pace. So who knows? Maybe he stays in the wing. Maybe he goes back to center. My hope is at some point, whether it's this year or next, that he goes back to the middle and becomes what we think he can become as a centerman. But listen, he's a great fit with those guys anyway. So one way or the other, it's a win.
No question. He's looking like the player they thought he was going to be. And I met Rem Pitlick at the golf tournament, and honest to God, he seemed like he could have been in a boy band. I never heard of this kid before. He had the glasses on. I'm like, but this kid, to me, when I met him, just seemed like a nice kid. I watched him on the ice last year. He did well. He comes back in here, and then, given the situation you're in, had to put him on waivers. But how difficult was that? And do you think he was going to get snapped up?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's always difficult. Stating back to the start of our conversation, when you said, what's the hardest thing about being an agent? It's having hard conversations with players. And it's worse being the bearer of bad news when you are the one that, to a certain degree, has an effect on the trajectory of a player's career. Particularly for me, coming from the agent side, where you're always trying to take care of the player. But, Rem, we think Rem's a good hockey player. We expect Rem's going to come back up here. He was struggling, not having the same level of success. Part of that was also opportunity. We got a numbers issue here. I know a lot of people think we sent Rem down to try to get other guys going so we could trade them away. We're not going to do that. We want, our biggest focus is on development. Otherwise, we would just send the young guys down and they wouldn't have to clear waivers. But I have been talking to teams and trying to resolve the numbers issue. So I had talked to just about every, maybe 30 or 31 of the GMs in the league, had a pretty good sense in terms of what their needs were. So when we, although we weren't able to get a trade done, at least to this point, we thought it was a reasonable calculated risk that Rem would clear waivers, and we wanted to go down and play and get that feel back, because the little plays that he made last year that connected all the time, they were going off a guy's skate or a stick blade so sometimes you just got to go and get back to not overthink it, not be in this environment.
Make things happen.
Produce. Just go. He's going to go. He's going to score a lot, and when he comes back up, the plays that were working a year ago that aren't working now, my guess is they're going to work again.
I got a few more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I know we've been going a while, but
you can keep me here for a few hours talking hockey.
Yeah, cool. I love that. Yeah, geez, I just got to tell you, the change in the atmosphere for the alumni guys like myself, it is so different to be around the organization now than it was the last 10 years. And, a lot of guys felt it, from Lafleur to Serge Savard to the whole lot of guys. We just didn't feel like we were welcome around there. And I get it. It's these guys, it's their time. I remember when as a player here, Dickie Moore come in the room all the time, Toe Blake, Rocket, Henry, these guys are walking around, and it was awesome. It was awesome to see these guys, and they would come in and, hey, how you doing? We talk. They maybe come during practice. It was awesome. But I like to personally say thank you for that, because it's nice to see the guys around and being welcomed. I think it's a big thing. And you
Well,
guys have certainly done that, and yourself, Jeff, and Marty. And,
well, to the alumni that are out listening and that haven't been around, like, yeah, we think it's great. We're one of the most successful professional sports organizations in sports, not just hockey, and we want players to appreciate the legacy of the Montreal Canadiens, which ultimately was delivered by the former players, and we want them to be proud to be here, and we want this to become a destination that people want to come play hockey. And I never believed that. I mean, despite Vinny's situation, which was really unique, when you have however many years of whatever, but what we want Montreal to be is, like, I always felt like hockey players are happy when hockey's going well. And that was, dating back to Vinny fighting with Tortorella. And I said, like, when you face adversity as an athlete, when it's not going well, it comes home with you. It doesn't stay at the rink. I mean, probably comes home with everybody. If I have a bad day, it's going to come home with me, but it's at a higher level when you're an athlete. In part because you're known as that. So much of your identity is that. So, the reverse of that, I think, is if hockey's going well, if you're in a good environment to play hockey, you're happy.
Yeah.
Your wife's probably happier. Your family's probably happier. You're just a better member of the family. So we want Montreal to be that place where guys can have success and work hard and enjoy working hard together. And we think the alumni are part of that.
That's awesome. And there's nothing like going to the rink when you're winning hockey games. When you're losing, boy, it can be difficult. I've been through both ends of it, so I certainly understand that. Recently we saw the Bruins signing a kid, Mitch Miller, and boy, the backlash was big. And probably I don't know. I'm sure they thought about it, but. And I'm not asking you to comment on them so much, but going into when you talked about character, and I know the Bruins talk about character a lot. Every team wants character guys, but sometimes I guess you put that aside because this guy might really be able to help us. We look at situation here. You inherited the draft in a Logan Mailloux. So when we talk about character, and this has been hashed out here in the newspapers before you got here, and now you're here. How do you deal with that? And are you convinced? Like, have you done your due diligence? We heard Kim Neely say they did their due diligence. Then all of a sudden something come up, which I didn't buy. But anyway. Have you done your due diligence on that player? And are you convinced he can be? He's changed that character, and he can come into this locker room someday if the league says okay, and make a difference.
Yeah, I don't care whether we make a trade. We make decisions and projections. I don't care if it's about the talent of a player, about the character of a player. Like, unless you're in his backpack and get to listen to every moment and every second of a person's life, we go through it. Chris, like, you and I are having a conversation. We may both think we're good guys, but you don't know me that well. You may, you could talk to a lot of people and try to figure that out. We had the good fortune of having Logan around the team and the players all summer because of he came here to do the rehab on his shoulder, to live with a billet family, and so what we're seeing when you watch him interact and all that kind of stuff is he appears to be somebody that could fit, that is a good character kid who made a mistake, and I don't ever want to listen. I got a daughter.
Oh yeah,
I don't want diminish the impact in any way of what he did, but I also feel like, and I hope one day, and that's going to require Logan as a character. And by the way, like, this isn't it isn't like we signed Logan so it's over. I mean, Logan's going to is going to be held to a higher standard of conduct than any other hockey player, and a mistake is going to cost him, unlike any other or most other hockey players. But so he's going to have to do this every day and show, be an upstanding citizen. And if he is, and if he can do all of that and deal with that extra responsibility and still go on to be a really good hockey player, my hope is that maybe he helps somebody from this happening again. Maybe he helps 20 people from this happening again. He helps bring an awareness that appears to be lacking with a lot of young people, maybe probably old people too. I don't want to say that it's exclusive to young people, but young people are probably more apt to make a
mistake or do something wrong because their immaturity, their life experience, they don't have it. Maybe the way they're brought up. I certainly get it. And young kids, it's the same with the Miller thing. And, to go back to that, that kid's mother, Isaiah Crothers, his mom, apparently forgave the other kid who was involved in it. But the other kid did it like one time. And he went to her and to Isaiah and made the apology and was contrite. This other kid did it on Snapchat. Come on. How real can that be? How sincere can that be? So, and I understand Logan is, he paid his price over there, and he certainly, I don't know if he did face to face to the girl. I think he did, but and I know he's been taking, some classes on stuff like that. And being a young kid and making those mistakes, I get it. But, at some point, I think people deserve second chances. But you do have a lot to prove. Enough said. I get it.
1,000%. I agree. And I know Cam made that comment that I believe people deserve second chances. And, you always hope that if you're given that second chance, you're going to take advantage of it and be a better person, learn from what you did wrong. And if you really do, you do have the ability to add some additional positive to it, because if he plays for the Montreal Canadiens, he has a platform. And so we'll see where it all goes. But, we think that Logan is the kind of guy that could fit in the locker room and be a good part of the team. But again, there is a burden of responsibility that isn't going away, and I don't care if it's 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
It's always going to be there, no question about it. A few more here. I got I got to ask you about this guy, and I absolutely love him, and I think you know who I'm going to be talking about. He is Arbor Wi-Fi. God, what a nickname. Brilliant nickname by Weidman, apparently. And I was good at giving nicknames out back in the day. So when I heard this one, I'm there, that is brilliant. But God, and I get it. The draft can be a crapshoot. We don't know. But how does this kid not get drafted in the O and then get drafted in the NHL? And then he comes here. And was it Rama who kind of sniffed him out, Rob Ramage, but whoever did?
Marty Lapointe, I know, was a big part of it, and Matt Turek,
man.
And I don't know how much Rammer was. He may have been. Obviously, it was before I got here. Yeah. But I'll tell you what a guy like Arbor is going to do. In my opinion, it's easy to, we've seen some shift in terms of the draft where 18-year-old, like your first time eligibles would be almost exclusively the players that were drafted in the draft. And we drafted a couple of 19-year-olds this year, right, that are going in on their in Tourigny and Davidson are going on their 20-year-old junior seasons. And I think the success of somebody like Arbor Jacki is going to make another NHL team one day, watching a 19-year-old undrafted player having a lot of success in I don't care if it's college or Western Hockey League or anywhere else, to say, heck, we got to try this.
Yeah.
Like, let's not be afraid to draft the kid just because he's gone through the draft twice and not been claimed.
Yeah. In watching him, and I love the fact that he can play. I love the fact that he's tough as nails. And I love the fact that he's going to let everybody on that bench sit up a little taller. Mm-hmm. And I don't care what anybody says, that goes a long way with a hockey team. And I've watched it for 10 years since I've been back here. I saw Pacioretty get hurt and someone going up and patting Chara in the ass. And, that just does not go anywhere with me. And to see somebody there and the confidence it gives other guys and that security, I think it's awesome. What a find that kid is. And a nice kid. I had dinner with him at the Bell Center that night. I think maybe someone sat him with me for a reason, but I loved it. He's a great kid. Okay. Maybe we can wrap it up with, I guess, what do you think? I guess, what's your biggest surprise about, no, before I go to that, the salary cap and dealing with the price thing in the long-term injured reserve and getting that money on the shelf. How surprised were you, or how difficult did you think the job was going to be to deal with the salary cap? Because, boy, talk about up against it when you got here, right? That makes your job so much more difficult. You and Jeff and the scouting staff and the coaching staff.
Yeah, I think, listen, we were in a difficult situation cap-wise, no question. In part, certainly when you have Shea and Carey on the books, and there's some finer points of how the cap is calculated during long-term injury process and how things are treated that I actually didn't have 100% knowledge of. We didn't need it from an agency perspective that John Cedric who's fantastic. We call him Gray Cedric because we never get a black or white answer.
Yeah.
Anyways, we basically sat down and went through what these issues were and started to explore options to try to alleviate or address some of these issues. And listen, if we have success as an organization moving forward, if the young players have success, we'll continue to have to deal with it. It's the way that the league wants it, right? So you can't have a 1970s era Montreal Canadiens that wins year after year because the players are having too much success and they're going to cost too much money. But that's part of character to me too, right? Like, I represented Patrice Bergeron, and I can remember doing his first contract coming out of the entry-level system. It was the first time we had a cap. I think it was $37 million. And, I had said to him, we push him, like, don't worry about the other deals. Like, I think Joe Thornton coming out got 3 years at about total of $5 million. So under $2 million a year, but he had bonuses and different things that we don't have anymore. And I had said to him, I think you're 5 times 5. And he's like, nobody gets that. And I said, yeah, but the world just changed. So anyways, but I also had said to the Bruins at that point, like, in the old days, we paid players for the services they provided previously. Under this new system, we can reallocate the dollars and pay them to your best players. And this is how you start it. And I said, plus, if I were you guys, I'd rather come back. You need a player to take a discount to be able to keep everybody together. Why not let them get financial security, establish roots in the community, then come back and ask him to take a discount? Don't do it now and then pay the mother load when he's ready to make the most money. And I remember when his contract was up, he said, what do you think? And I said, well, you're worth X. And he said, we said we were going to take less.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I didn't say you were going to take less. I said, why wouldn't you? This is when a player would be in a better position to take less. And he started laughing. And he said, what do you think about 3 times 5? And I said, I think they're going to send a helicopter to pick you up. There'll be a red carpet, and they're going to roll you into that and make you sign right away. And he did. And then his next deal came up, and he called. He goes, what do you think I'm worth? I said, highest paid player is $8.5 million. I think at the time I think it was Perry and Getzlaf actually were the two highest. And I said, you're 9.5. He's like, how did I become 9.5? And I said, well, because you're better, in my opinion, and because there's a team 4.5 hours northeast of here who is your team's greatest rival. They're dying for a first line center. They're dying for a captain. Like, it's just a premium. And he said, yeah, but if I make that kind of money, we'll never win. And I want to win. I want 6.5. I was like, 6.5? You got to be kidding me. And I said to him, like, that's great. The problem is you can't make everybody else take less.
Yeah.
And he always said, all I can do is lead by example. I'll do my part, and it'll be up to everybody else whether they want to follow the line or not. And that type of character, there's a reason why the Bruins have had that kind of success. And Brad Marchand refused to take more than Patrice Bergeron.
That's unbelievable. To me, that is just a character personified. Some people would call it stupidity, but I certainly understand where that kid's coming from. And, man, I knew they took discounts, but hearing that story, man, that kid is, to me, even all the more impressive now. That's incredible to hear that.
Yeah, so we're hopeful that down the road that we're going to have guys that want to be part of this organization. Like, we're going to spend the maximum that we're allowed to spend to try to build a winner, but it's hard if everybody gets every dollar that they could otherwise get. That'll be their choice. But if you have good character people around who care about winning and care about the group, then hopefully you have a better chance of finding a way to make the puzzle work.
So in saying that and looking at that, it's almost if you draft well in this league, if you draft well, it's almost like you get penalized, right? If you drop down, when it comes time to sign those contracts that come out of the entry levels, and well, geez, now I can't keep everybody. Is there a way in the collective bargaining agreement moving forward that could be dealt with? Like, here's one thing, not that I thought of, I've heard of it, and I thought it made sense that you could spend whatever you want on one player in your team. He doesn't count against the cap. One player on it. Now the owners probably would never do that, but would that help alleviate some of the stuff that's going on when it comes to not being able to keep those really good players you draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that somehow took a dollar or X number of dollars that otherwise would go against your threshold and put it away. I think Major League Soccer has 2 players that don't count.
Okay.
I would prefer. I don't love that from a team building perspective because now we're anointing the guy. Yeah. I know the NFL has the franchise tag player. The NBA used to, and I haven't paid attention to what their CBA looks like today. They used to have what they called the Larry Bird exception, right? And you'd have a player whose cap hit counted as a percentage of the actual dollar amount. I was wondering and thinking, and I haven't put a lot of detail into the thought process, but what if a guy came out of the entry level, okay, and you sign him, and year one, whatever his number was, it counted at a discount against that number,
okay,
for the cap. And then year 2, that percentage went up, and maybe by year 3 or year 4, you're counted at 100% of the number. Does it allow a little bit longer runway? Because the problem you have is
development.
You look at these,
right?
You have development, and you have, like, the fan base wants to get behind and identify with the players, and you go out and you draft these young guys and you can't afford them right away, then you take away from creating those, like having a face to the organization that's more than the logo.
Yeah. And we see that now, right, with Suzuki and Caulfield, and Gallagher was a face here for so many years in Price, and still is, mind you. looking at your job here now, and I'm going to ask you this question, and I can let you go. I know I had you for a long time here, and I appreciate it. What is for you the biggest, I guess, surprise of your job, taking this job so far? Has been the biggest kind of like, whoa, moment for you?
I think the certainly, even though I grew up here, I think it's the following, the passion, the intensity of the fan base. And I don't say that in a negative way. I actually think it's a positive. It's just more than I remembered. That would be one. I think the business of it, not the hockey side of it, right? Like, I love hockey. Like, we've been on for an hour and a half. We could save another hour and a half. Like I said, you might have to press the red button to get me off if we're talking hockey.
Well, I appreciate it.
There's a business part of it too, and that part, whether be it trying to build out what we wanted in hockey operations, like how did we go about building out our analytics group? How do we go about building out our development group? How do we go about our sports science and training and medical and then managing the people, right? That was probably a component of the business that's not hockey specific. Building a culture and making sure that, contributing to that process. Because to me, the culture is not limited to the locker room. That was probably, when you think about the job, you just think about the hockey piece of the job, and there's the other pieces of the job, and that was pretty a time intensive component of the job early on, and maybe we're a little more hockey focused now, but those would probably be two of the surprises to me.
Okay, if you could take one part of your job and just give it to someone else, what would it be? So you do this part.
I think Gortson Sedgy would tell you that that's all I do every day. My wife would say that too. In fact, my brother used to say, you spend more time trying to delegate than it would take you to do what you have to do. There was one part. I enjoy negotiating, and it was a part of my previous career. It's a part of this career. It's harder on this side because you're making decisions about players' careers, and you're making decisions about, like, when we trade guys away, we're taking a member of their family away. Like, he may have been in that locker room for 6 or 7 years, and he may be a central figure in that locker room, and we take him out, and that it has an impact. Yeah. And I probably wasn't, maybe that's another element of surprise for me. Like, I wasn't as prepared for it, and I don't like it. But I don't think there's such thing as a job where everything's perfect.
I hear you. Now, that negotiating part that you talked about, like, you've done it your whole career, doing it on this side, what's the difference there, like, for you? You're promoting someone. You want to get them the most money you can, best contract you can get them. And now, sure, you want to be fair with someone, but, it's like those I used to hear about the arbitration cases, right? You go in, the team fucking rips the player apart, like to make their point. But how's that? How's that on this side, the negotiation side? How different is it, I guess?
Well, it's funny. I felt like when I was young in the agent business and trying to make a name for yourself, you were trying to get the best deal, and you didn't care about anything other than the best deal, make your player the most money, and that was really the era that we were in, right? There was no cap. It was Bob Goodenow, saying it was all macro, no micro. Like, you got to get the right deal, and it pushes the whole group and whatever not. But as we moved on, I especially in a cap world, like, I always felt like you wanted your player to be paid commensurate with his value. You clearly, as an agent, don't want to have a bunch of undervalued players. You're probably not going to be in business for very long. But having overvalued players wasn't great either, because they got stuck in this new cap world where the guy makes too much money. He's in a bad situation. We can't move him. You had all these kinds of problems. So I always felt like getting a win-win in a contract was great. And I really feel that here on this side of things too. Generally when you're negotiating trades, most of the time teams are coming from different perspectives, right? So we do a trade with Calgary or Florida last year or Colorado. They're trying to win a Stanley Cup, and we're trying to put the pieces in place for the future, or they don't have money. We didn't have money. Like, you look at it and say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to keep Lehkonen and this guy and that guy and keep them all under the cap. I want Lehkonen to go win Stanley Cup, be a superstar. I hate, he's really close with Galley and some of these guys. I hated like pulling him out of here. And, but I'm like, it's not like when you do this, when you do a trade, you hope that every player you trade away fails and you win the trade. You hope that at the end of the day, we moved ourselves in the direction we're hoping to go, and that the other team gets what they want out of it all.
Yeah, for sure. And you brought him up, Lehkonen. Love that player. He was what a trooper he was, and a coach's dream. That kid, no question about it. No question.
Only guy. It's like Lecky. I remember, ironically, ended up being 24 hours before I traded him. But like a lot of the guys were nervous and uptight, so I was trying to communicate with them, knowing how players feel at that time of the year. And his name was out a lot, so I saw him after the game. Like, Lecky, you haven't come to see me. You haven't asked anything. He's like, I figured if there was anything I needed to know, you'd tell me, and it's none of my business. And I said, well, listen, I can't promise you that we wouldn't trade you. But we're not trying to trade you. People are calling on it, and like, unless it's something that we feel we have to do, we won't do it right now. And he said, okay. Like,
and I tell you, I was so happy for him winning the Stanley Cup. See him with his dad there, his family. Like, like I said, that kid was a trooper here. He was really, really good. I'm gonna get one last one.
Okay.
Jonathan Drouin. It's been kind of a tumultuous time here. I remember when he came here, and they talked to him about dealing with the pressure of being a French-Canadian kid coming back to Montreal. How are we going to deal with that? And he said, I won't have a problem with it. Well, he's had a difficult time here. And again, I'm not here to throw this kid under the bus. I did recently last season put out a comment on him that I apologized to him for, because I was being a fresh bastard and frustrated with the play. I didn't know the circumstance and should have held back. I didn't. But I have since gone and looked him in the eye and I apologized to him. But he always is leaving me, and I think the fan base, wanting more. How difficult that situation, how difficult is that to deal with when you're looking for more from a player, or at least there's an expectation there that we need this much from you and you're not getting it?
Well, it's funny. I called him into the office in the summer and tried to, I've represented players. Angelo Esposito was, a can't miss kid. Heck, my brother was kind of a can't miss kid at 16 who played 3 games in the NHL. So I called him in and said, listen, I know a lot of people have a lot of expectations for you. And I imagine that at some point it just becomes hard to live up to everybody else's expectations. And I don't know what you have for yourself. We just want you to come and enjoy being at the rink and playing hockey. And, you don't need to score 40 goals and you don't need to do this. Just have fun with it. Make the most of it and enjoy it. He's actually a really good guy.
Yeah.
He's a really nice guy. I mean, you see the talent. You'd love for him to be more productive. Could it come? I think anything can happen.
Right.
So I'm a eternal optimist, and I'll hope that Joe has success. And Whether it's this year or next year or another year, whether that's here or somewhere else, who knows? But he is a really good guy, and it's like I didn't play. I know more vicariously through others. I didn't play at the NHL level, but it's just I always felt that it's harder to be good between the ears.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part. It's like, how do you deal with the stress and the pressure? And I remember another Montrealer, Matt Lombardi, who I represented. He had been injured at one point, and he was out, and he was like, I got so much energy, Kent. Like, I feel like I could jump over my house. And it's like, well, Matt, play like 15 minutes a game, 80 games a year, 82 games a year. I said, you got like 70-year-olds running ultra marathons. And you know what they do the day after when they wake up? They go run 10 miles just to loosen up.
Yeah.
I said, how much of your fatigue do you really think is physical? And how much of it do you just think it's the mental drain of trying to prepare for the 15 minutes that you're going to play? It's like you go to the morning, the day before, you go to practice, you come home, you're thinking about your game. You got to eat, you got to sleep at the right time. You got to do all this other stuff. You wake up, you go to your morning skate, you're thinking about the game. You do it, you come back home, you got to eat at the right time, you got to have your nap, you wake up, you think about it, you go perform, and those 15 minutes may not be good. Then you stay up all night, worrying about how you weren't good, and then you go back at it again the next day. And I said, I really think the people that are the athletes that are best equipped to deal with that end up certainly getting the most of their potential. Connor McDavid's Connor McDavid, clearly athletically superior to a lot of other athletes. My guess is Connor McDavid's also pretty well equipped mentally to deal with the pressure that comes with being Connor McDavid.
Yeah, for sure. He's shown it so far. Listen, Kent Hughes, I appreciate you taking the time, and I got to tell you, it's refreshing to see what you've done here in the short time you've been here. This organization seems to me like it's on the right path. I cannot wait to see one day, hopefully, this team back in the finals and lifting that Stanley Cup again. And I hope you're here to see it and be part of it, because you certainly I look at what's going on here, and it's, for me, the most promising. It's been here since I've been back here 12 years now. To me, it's the most promising group, and like things looking up like since I've been back. So I want to wish you all the luck in the world, and hope one day you can put one of those on your finger. Be awesome.
That would be great. Well, I appreciate you having me, and thank you for your kind words.